I'd like to bring the meeting to order and ask roll be called, please.
Blue. Disharu.
Here.
Henry. Here. Holzhauser. Here. Humbles.
Here.
Weidenbach.
Here.
Wisdom.
Here.
I'd like to ask everyone to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The board will now move on to the public participation portion of the meeting. Dr. Dearman will begin with the superintendent's report. Dr. Dearman?
I'm sorry, I was talking to Mrs. Henry and got distracted. I'm coming here.
It's all here. No, it's okay.
Oh, did you put it in there? Thank you very much. I have 5 things. I had a FOIA request from a specific individual asking for the number of minority certified staff and administrative staff, and that has been satisfied and sent. The needs ratings have came out. Obviously, I set a lot of information out regarding that, and the graphic talked about it at Opening Institute, shared that with our staff. As far as our ranking, we were 22nd in state, and there was a nice graphic that showed 1 to 21 were all suburban Collier County schools, and then you have this one little green dot downstate that was us. So I was very appreciative of the hard work the staff and administration have put in with our students to get that accomplished. Mr. Adrian will have more information specific to this. I sent out some information about a class that he has worked with his science department to get NCAA approval, which I think is a real feather in the cap of Dunlap High School. So just a FYI, that information is coming to you via Mr. Adrian here very soon. Last week, I was the guest of honor at PADA, and please don't ask me to pronounce that different parts of that acronym, but it's basically the Indian community here in the Peoria area. It's their 73rd annual Independence Day, and it was held at Hickory Grove. Thank you to Mr. Etnier for allowing them to use your building and getting it set up. I was very surprised at the number of people that were there. I was told there'd be 75, maybe a little bit more, and there was probably close to 300. So the gym was completely packed, not a seat in the house, and we had to bring in extra chairs. So very well attended, and I gave about a 15-minute talk about the Dunlap School District and the things that we have going within our district as it relates to the Indian community and the successes we've had. Last item of business, lights in the gym. Custodial staff under the guidance of Mr. Grimm did some paint work in there. Looks wonderful. Scott has bragged on it, Katie's bragged on it. It's a little dark. We're aware of it. It's being addressed. Tom's working right now with the company to bring in some additional lights. Should be relatively easy because there's already conduit run right there, just to kind of brighten that up. It's kind of one of those things where when you painted the girders dark, you didn't really know it was going to darken the room that much. And then when the new bleachers come in right now, they're going to be a little bit darker color as well. So I'm really concerned that you put dark with dark, it's going to get even darker. So we're going to bring some lighting in to brighten that up, especially up center court where most of your action happens. That is all I have at this point, Dr. Humbles.
Okay, thank you very much. At this time, we'll move to the public comments. Is there anyone who wishes to address the board? If so, please raise your hand. Seeing none, this concludes the public participation portion of the meeting. The board will now move on to information discussion items. The school activity accounts reports are included in the packet for school activity accounts. Are there any questions? Okay, next Mr. Wisdom will share an update regarding the swimming pool. Mr. Wisdom?
Our committee continues to work on its assignments But we wanted to come and give you an update at this point. As you all recall, the assignment was to study these 4 options with the pool. First one, we have the price on that. The second one, we don't have any price. It's a long-term thing that will take us not months, but years, if it's possible. And so that will be an ongoing thing. Constructing the new pool, we've provided a best guess estimate of what that would be. We are still continuing to work on what the cost of refurbishing the pool would be to address the various problems that the swimming team and people have been dealing with. This is kind of a summary of things that we've brought to the board in the past as part of that refurbishing. The problems that are either been addressed or are being addressed are on the left in red. We're waiting on the HVAC system to address the top items. The bottom ones we have done at this point. Problems on the right are remaining, and we have made our best guess estimate of what those costs would be, but there are a couple things. We don't have definite numbers, and we're a little reluctant to give best guess numbers at this point. Second, one of the things that our committee has been very concerned about is we have some items that we believe are grandfathered in, and if we take too far of a step toward construction, we may have to change those as well. So if we come and we give you estimates on the cost of these items, and then the state comes in and says, well, if you're doing that, you got to do this and this and this. So our committee decided at its last meeting that we should invite a representative of the state to come down, and we could show them what we're talking about and try and get them to give us some advance notice if that would trigger any grandfathering. Troy Hammer, who is our maintenance technician for the pool, has a good relationship with the state inspector that comes once a year and inspects our pool. And he talked to him about it. He said, we can't do that. You have to submit a proposal, and then we'll review it. And so we are in a catch-22. We can't present you something we think is realistic that might be a real number that we might not have to add on to later without some state input. The state won't do it until we take something to them. So what we're here tonight is to ask, well, before I get into that, you'll recall this is a drawing that we submitted in one of our programs. There's only really one realistic way to add spectator seating, and that's on what's the west wall, the area in the red on the left. There used to be garage doors there that would open up. Those have been covered over, and so we could attach a building and put some additional bleachers in there. And we've looked into the possibility of putting windows at the back of that would add a great deal of natural light, which we don't have. And so we've talked about that. On the right-hand side, this is where our fairly old filtration system is. It's big because there have to be so many sand tanks. The new systems condense those down into one unit that's about 1.5 times the size and height of a refrigerator and about the same width. So if we did that, we could add some more storage space, which we desperately need as well. But what we're here tonight is to get out of this dilemma. We would like to ask the board if we can work with the Director of Operations and our committee and work with the school architects to come up with a plan for that additional seating on the left with some windows in it, the new filtration system and a pump system on the right. Lighting system, that lighting system we have is old, and it definitely would not be allowed if we built it like that today. A new LED system would be substantially more efficient. And by the way, the filtration system, I think we pointed out, would pay for itself in about 7.5 years, Tom, is that right?
Yes.
And then draining the locker room areas that don't drain right now, and then painting the pool area, the ceiling in the locker rooms, and then submitting those plans to the state for their consideration, hopefully approval without putting in a bunch of other demands on us, and then getting realistic cost estimates for that work that we could then bring back to the board. So that's what we're here for tonight. Tom, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you pretty much laid out what we're looking for. We just need permission to move forward in order to get the best guidance from the state.
I have a question. Does that include new lockers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, on the right, we've got old rusty lockers. Our athletic director, Caslett, has given us a price for replacing those already, so that we know.
That'll be included in it?
Yeah.
Okay.
What direction do you need from us? You can contact the state and get that information without our permission, can't you?
We can't because we need a drawing to take to them, and only our architects can give us that drawing.
And so, and it costs money for the architects to do that?
Yeah.
Can you not give, does the board contractor not give you his idea with his estimate to go with that or not?
Well, we can use that estimate, Tim, but then when we come in here, we say, this is what we think these items on the right are going to cost, but we haven't gone to the state with a plan. And then when we go to the state with a plan, they may say, well, there's some other things that, according to code, you also have to bring up to date.
Because right now
So
we're
it's extra cost.
grandfathered, so we don't have to do those things.
You probably need an architect to do that properly. So
They probably
would know
require
life
it, don't
safety
they?
rules and all of the above.
At some point, but if you just want a rough ballpark, is this going to cost $100,000 or $300,000? I can tell you that.
This we already know roughly.
You do that.
So
No,
the
I'm talking
state,
the addition.
the state requires the architect?
Well, yeah, they're not going to take a plan that Tom and I come up with.
No, I don't want an engineered stamp drawing.
And it's the only way that we think we can avoid surprises. And that is saying, hey, you've got to do more because you're grandfathered in on this. If you're going to do that much, you've got to do this as well.
I think that's the prudent thing to do, especially when you're talking about safety issues, lighting, whatever it is with the pool. I would think that would be the wise thing to do, would you, Dr. Dearman?
What's it going to cost for the architect to draw it up?
We'd have to get an estimate from them.
And who is it?
Well, right now, our district architect is Farnsworth.
So they would draw it up and charge you X amount. Can we know that amount, or do they just send us bills?
No, I can get them to give us a cost for it.
From what I'm hearing, Mike, is that if we don't do this, there could potentially be code issues that we would not be grandfathered for, and it could probably be a significant higher amount of money. So absolutely, I agree with Abby, it's a prudent thing to do. Take the right steps, because you could tell us it's going to be maybe $100,000. It could come in, who knows what. So absolutely.
No, I'm not saying not to get an architect. I'm saying for your first rough ball guess, maybe you don't even want to consider this addition if it's $500,000.
But you wouldn't know.
Yes,
right?
you're sure you do. Sure you do. A contractor will tell you it's a rough ball.
I can
All right.
fairly safely sit here and tell you that these things aren't going to be $500,000 by themselves.
That's fine.
Unless they hit us with something that says you've got to tear out the underground piping and put in all new, something like that.
And you could probably, from the architect, we could get an estimate of what he would charge. And then from the architect, they'll be able to give you a ballpark figure that the state is going to be more likely to consider, because they want to make sure we follow the safety rules and whatnot for swimming pools.
I'm just seeing that everything's going over budget than what we ballpark, and I'm just trying to hold it down. So I'd like to know what it is first, I guess. What the architect's going to charge? Is he going to charge 10
Well, I
grand,
think the thing you can
15,000?
do is if we want to move ahead with this, give us a range within which we'd have authority to move ahead. Otherwise, we'd have to come back. Would you agree, Tom?
A range for the architect
Yeah.
costs, or a range, okay.
No, just architecture.
Okay.
To get to the next level.
I have no idea.
Otherwise, I mean, we can come forward right now at the next board meeting and give our estimates on the black items. But the first thing we are going to tell you is we can't guarantee that these are good numbers.
Right.
Do we have any idea what an architect charges?
I would like to think that we could do this one of two ways. We could do a T&M, a time and material not to exceed, and give them a dollar amount, or we can ask them for a firm proposal. And in this situation, I would recommend that we get a firm number, because there are a number of unknowns that collectively as our committee, we don't know.
Sure.
That way, they'll look at it, they'll give us their price to do that. And I wouldn't want to get into a T&M and only be 3/4 of the way done.
If we were to give you a range this evening, Tom, what would be your recommendation not to exceed? 10,000?
Well, that was a number that I have. And if I see it's going to be significantly more than that, I can certainly let Mike know. And then we can move.
Does that seem reasonable, Mr. Wisdom?
Yeah, I think so. Again, if you look at the new building on the left is nothing substantial.
Right.
And changing out the filtration system is a little technical, but a lot of that they'll probably get from...
They'll get from an outside source.
Yeah,
Sure.
so...
But will that architectural work that they do, like if we're looking at adding those 3 sections for extra seating, we don't know what could impact our grandfathering, but would that ensure us that the state could then come in and say, yes, you're okay to add that seating capacity and will not affect your grandfathering? Does it give us that protection? I'm just afraid we're going to put this seating in, even if we have the architects draw it up and say, this is what the seating is going to cost, but then the state come back on and say, oh, you just increased the seating capacity with that many people in there now. We can't have the filtration the way it is. You have to totally redo it, and that's going to be a huge cost.
And that's a very good question, and I've had some preliminary discussions with Farnsworth, and there are 2 entities that will ultimately determine the size of that seating area, and it would be the number of bathers that can use the pool, and then it will also be the number of exits that will help determine the size of what we can add. So it's not that the district can go to Farnsworth and say, we want a 25-foot deep by 102-foot long room. They will do their calculations per state guidelines, and then they'll be able to come back and say, you can put a room on this size. So each individual in this room has to have a minimum number of square foot, and that's how seating or capacity is determined.
So will they say, you can do this, and then you'll still be grandfathered?
Now, I cannot answer that.
Oh, okay.
Let me make it clear. We are not going to the architects to help us get really, really solid estimates. We're going to the architects to draw up a plan that we can submit to the state and see if they approve it. If they do, whether they let us go, or if they say you can do it, but you got to do a bunch of this.
Yes.
Okay.
If they say you can do it, but you got to do a bunch of that, then we come back.
Then you'll know the cost.
and
Yes.
we can decide whether to even move forward with anything.
We would
That's
rather.
why I was wanting to know. I didn't phrase it very well.
No, and that's the right way to think about it. We want to bring these entities in now instead of irritate them later and be at their mercy, because ultimately they will dictate yes or no on what we can and cannot do.
Since this is an add-on, we don't have to get any approval outside
No.
a referendum or anything like that, because it's an add-on. Okay.
I'm okay with that, getting the plan from the architects.
Ms. Henry?
Yes.
Mr. Wagenbach?
That's fine.
I think it's a smart thing to do.
Answer.
Okay. I would say that you would move forward. Do we need a motion to,
You said the amount.
yes, a motion for amount? Or?
It's
Well, it's under 30,000, so we don't have to approve it, right?
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Or 25, what's the number?
25. You're right.
Are you done with the pool? I did have a question on, oh no, it's on the bleachers, never mind.
On the gym bleachers?
Any other questions before we move on? Thank you both. I appreciate your time. Mr. Haggett's here to present information about the FY20 tentative budget. Mr. Haggett?
Whenever I present budget information or financial information, I try to always keep in mind that I want to provide as accurate as information or as detailed information as we can without getting so far in the weeds that I hurt you. So this is kind of the way I present budget and financial information. I feel like it's a nice medium. It's not too high level, but it's also not in the weeds. So just to kind of give you an idea of where I'm coming from. The first thing we're going to do is start off by giving you just a very quick financial review from the year we just finished up, our fiscal year 19. And Carrie's going to help me because I'll need some help someday from the instructional coaches on this, but when you're using spreadsheets and trying to line it up into PDFs, it doesn't always line up great. And you also never know how it's going to look as far as size when you get in here, so I apologize if you have to squint a little bit. The first slide we're going to look at, and I'm going to have to look maybe even over here. This is the overall fiscal year 19 financials, big picture by funds. So you're going to see at the top, there's the 4 funds: education, O&M, transportation, and working cash. That's typically what we call the operating funds. And then a little bit further down, you'll see the non-operating funds, bond and interest, that's our loan payments, IMRF and Social Security capital projects toward health and life safety. In the yellow column, what I want to point out to you is the first yellow column there, that is the fund balance that we started back in July 1 of 2018. So that's where we started this year in each of those funds. The next column, and I always want to point out, these are unaudited numbers. Please always keep that in mind. We have not completed the audit yet. It's in process for FY19. So these are all numbers based on what we have internally. After we get the audit, then we update those and then move forward. But you'll see the unaudited revenues in the first kind of light blue column. And then the second column is our unaudited expenditures for the year. And then the gray column there is the budget surplus and deficit. So that is where you're going to see what we were plus or minus for the year in each of those funds. So you'll see in the top tier of funds there, we were positive in all those funds. The last yellow column then is our unaudited fund balance as at the end of the last fiscal year. Let's see, if we go down just a little bit, you'll see the next funds. Again, it's the same pattern. We just separate out those funds. I'll point out the scary red number under capital projects. Let me explain under capital projects what happened here at Dunlap. So with the addition to DVMS, this is now spanning over 3 fiscal years. So we received all of the money like in June of 18, which was the end of 1 fiscal year. In this past fiscal year, FY19, we spent most of that money, but the project wasn't complete by the end of the fiscal year. So you'll see in the FY20 budget when I get there, there's still some money going to be paid out in that. But that's why that number is so far off, because the revenue came in 1 year, most of it was expended in the next. And so then you'll see total at the end, bottom line there, the negative 2.2. Again, so much of that is based on that capital projects. That's kind of why we separate those things out, because capital projects just always throws things off when you're looking at your financials.
And what happens to that 1.8 million in excess? Does that go into reserve? Does that go into money markets? Or? So
technically everything, when you get to the last yellow column, everything there is your fund balance, so that is your reserves. For us, and when you look on the treasurer's report, that will be, other than a couple of $1 million that we have to keep in what's called the general operating account, which is the checking account where we pay our bills out of, we maintain everything else in the money markets, which is at that 2% interest. And then we move things over as time, usually with each payroll or with each accounts payable, we'll move money out of the higher interest accounts over to the operating account to pay those bills. Okay, this is where I will get a little bit more specific for you, and again, I apologize for the size. This is basically now narrowing down, so I gave you a big picture on the first slide, now it's the education fund here, and what I do is with the revenue, I break it down by, there's 3 categories of revenue, local, I'm trying so hard not to give you a school finance lesson, I apologize. It's local, state, and federal. Obviously, in our district, most of our revenue comes in local, property taxes, school fees, admissions, things like that. and then the state money, and then federal. So you'll see that we were under budget as far as revenues coming in and our local revenue, but we were at 96%. We were right on target with our state money and almost right there with what we expected in the federal. So what you're seeing here is the budget versus actual for FY19. Left column being the budget, right column being the actual, so you can see what we did compared to what we thought we would do.
And why did we come in under for local?
Because the property tax money was budgeted higher than what came in. That's all. All that 1.2 is practically all property tax money. Another thing that's weird here in Peoria County is it does make it a little bit more challenging to budget because you're getting your first revenue, your first property tax payment in June, and your second payment then comes in around September. So again, it's kind of getting split over 2 years. So when you're doing a budget for like right now, we know what our September-ish property tax money is going to be. We don't know what our June property tax money is going to be, so you're kind of guessing what that second payment is, and so that's where you.
So it's mostly just the regular property tax money. It's not like appeals, I guess.
No. This is just regular property tax money. Yep. Then you'll see halfway down, those are the expenses. You will see, and most of those, we're breaking them down by objects or categories. So we break down by salaries and benefits. Obviously, salaries and benefits make up the bulk of the expenses in any school district. And then you'll see purchase services, supplies, capital outlay. The one thing that I'll point out, because again, I don't want to take too much time, the one number that you'll see, the other where it says 142%, so we were over budget there. That is the place where a lot of our special education placements come out of. So again, when you're budgeting, you're giving it your best guess, but as Mrs. Hart can attest to, when we're going through a school year, we don't know what's going to come up through a school year, especially with special education placements. So that's why that number is higher there.
David?
Yes? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sure I'm reading this wrong, but, so the budget was for 24 million under salaries. The actual that we spent was 23.
Yes, we were under budget in salaries by $1.4 million last year.
Okay, so it shows deficit in parentheses. Isn't that surplus?
It's all how you look at it in the
okay.
Yeah. So we were under budget. So in this column, if it's in parentheses, that means we were under budget.
Under budget.
If it's out of parentheses, we were over budget.
Okay, I got it.
And then you'll see at the bottom number, you'll see that 598,000. That is the difference. Again, it kind of goes back to that first slide. That's our actual surplus in FY19 for Fund 10. All right, let's move on to operations and maintenance. This one's a little bit easier. Education is the big one. Operations and maintenance, a lot easier to explain. Everything in revenue comes in local. There's no state or federal in our O&M budget. We came in at 95%, and you will see salaries and benefits. Everything in O&M came in under budget last year. And we're actually, you'll see the percentage, we spent 86% of budget in O&M last year. Surplus of $431,698 in O&M. And I don't want to lose you guys. All right, transportation, FY19. Transportation, we were at 98% of our revenues. So we're right on target there as well. And then salaries and benefits, you'll see other than just barely in purchase services, we were under budget in every area of transportation last year as well, with a surplus of $318,150 in transportation. And then the last one that I will give you here, this is the tort fund. You will see we were right at 100% of our revenues, and then our expenses, we were only at 78 or 72% of our expenses in the tort fund, with a fund balance of $687,657. We'll talk more about that fund when I get to the FY20 budget, because that's going to look a little bit different. These I just want to give you, and I know these are hard to read as far as the numbers, but I just want you to see the trend. So this is our education fund, the Fund 10. This is a history of fund balances since 2010. Keeping in mind 2019 is projected, it's unaudited, but everything else is the real numbers. So you will see the trend, especially since 2013, has been going up. The surplus was far less between 2018 and 2019 than it had been in past years, but there was still a little bit of one. And O&M, you will see also going up since about 2013. This is transportation, also going up since 2013. And then working cash, pretty much the same thing. It looks like in 2014, we abated some money from working cash. And since then, the fund has been growing again. Working cash is basically kind of like your savings account, if you think kind of personal finance. Okay, now I think I've got my next, oh, nope, sorry, we had one more, tort fund. And you'll see the progression there of the fund balance of the tort fund. Okay, let's move on to the FY20 tentative budget. I try to use the same formats for all of these so people kind of start getting used to seeing a similar pattern. I think it makes it easier to see. So for this is our FY20 tentative budget. So we present this in the month of August. It becomes on display for 30 days, and then at the September board meeting, we'll have to actually approve the final budget as well. I always, in this kind of presentation, a budget is our best estimate of what we know at this time. The example I gave you with special education placement, we don't know what could come up. We don't know if a chiller is going to go down. We don't know, so we base things on what we possibly can tell you at this point in time. So let's see, I told you we're going to have this on display for 30 days, then we'll approve the final budget in September. During this time period, we take this opportunity also to fine-tune and adjust as we find out more information. If we find out more information on federal grants, then we can update that information. If we discover, hey, we know now that we're going to have to replace this or something, we have that opportunity between the tentative budget and the final budget to make those adjustments. So this is the, yes, Karen?
Well, I just wanted to ask about the cushion at some point. So every year, there's been sort of a cushion put in because if you go over a certain, we were told if you go over a certain line item, then you have to resubmit like an amendment to the state, and it's a big hassle.
It's not by line item. There's a lot of misconceptions about when you have to amend a budget.
Okay.
Amending a budget is based if we knew a fund, say Fund 90, so we knew we budgeted this amount, but we found out, man, we've got this big health, life, safety issue that came up, and we blew that budget by a large amount, then we definitely need to go back and amend. Okay. But it's definitely not done by line.
It isn't? Okay.
No.
So, I guess, and I know you answered this a little bit, but you said in some line items you are putting cushions in.
Yes.
And in some you're not.
Right.
When you are putting cushions, like about how much is it? Or do you know what the total amount of cushion is?
No, it just honestly depends on the line item. As I explained, so there's going to be some line items that we know it costs us $15,000 a year for the website maintenance or whatever. We know that that's a set cost, so there's absolutely no reason to put a cushion in for that line item.
Okay.
That would just be inflating the budget, for no reason. There's some things when you look at, I'll try to think of something off the top of my head, but there's some things you're going to look at and you'll be like, you know what, this year we spent this much, last year it was this much, and this year was this, and there's not necessarily a rhyme or reason, so then you take the average of it and you kind of get an idea of what you're doing an average. And then there's some things that you're not unsure, special education placement. We put a cushion in there because we're just not sure. So that's why it's not specifically consistent based on what you decide for what line for a cushion.
And in the past, I don't know if you remember Abby and Teresa, but there was an actual percentage that we kind of debated about what percentage to have the cushion be. And I think we came up with 3.5% or 4%. We had like across the board cushion. So that's why I asked the question.
Sure.
But we're not doing it this time.
I did not do
Except
a specific 3.5% on every line. Okay. But this is the way I've done it before, where you just base it on the situation.
Many people do it differently. I mean, say you had a big influx of students in special ed or otherwise, and you needed to open 2 more kindergarten classrooms, or how many ever in a large district like this. You kind of hope to put a little extra money in your budget for that.
Right, exactly.
Okay, yeah. That answers my questions. Thank you.
Good deal. Okay, so same format. So operating funds, other funds. Projected fund balance, again, that is unaudited, that's what we're thinking we're starting this year. And then tentative revenues, tentative expenses. You will see the column there in the gray. So that is where we're looking kind of like bottom line. So in the education fund, we're looking at a deficit of $27,000. One thing I want to remind everybody of, the reason why we're looking at some of these numbers differently this year is because our EAV went down. We're receiving $900,000 less just in the ed fund, so that makes those things challenging. We're going to weather the storm. We're hoping that it's a one-year thing, and then we're going to reevaluate. If it becomes a trend, then we have to make different decisions. But that's also why we have the reserves that we have, and we're very blessed here at Dunlap to be able to have those and to be able to use those in this kind of year. I want to point out in O&M where it had the deficit of 1.1. The things that I want to point out there is a lot of these, what you have to look at is what's a recurring expense and then what's a one-time expense. So one-time expenses that are causing that O&M fund to show that deficit this year, the property purchase that we're going to be doing, the pool repairs that we've already been working on, the soccer shelters, the sound system at Dunlap High School, the new tractor that we have to purchase, and summer projects. We spent the same amount of money on summer projects this year as we did the year before, but that money came out of different funds. So more money came out of Fund 20 this year than it did last year. So that all of those things that I just rattled off to you come up to $1.172 million. We're at 1.188. So that's a lot of where that's at. Transportation, I'll point out, it's a deficit. We had a transportation audit a couple of years ago, actually 2 years ago. We owe money back to the state. So we're going to see probably a deficit in transportation for the next few years. I think it's about we're spreading those payments over 3 years. So we're going to see that for a few years. Dropping down to the others, again, that capital projects, that's the remainder of the money that we haven't spent yet for Dunlap Valley. So that's why you're going to see that negative 2.2. Tort, I want to talk about Tort for a second.
Before you move to
yes.
Tort, so on the capital projects, I was thinking DVMS came from, we were going to pay for that with the sales tax.
That's for the county facility sales tax, correct?
Right.
But it still comes out of that fund.
It still comes out of that.
Right.
But, okay.
Yep.
So it's being paid by the sales tax money that's coming in over the years.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and one thing that I did want to point out about that capital projects, now that those payments are coming out, you're going to we are actually moving money from capital projects over to the bond and interest fund. Okay. So the auditor is putting $90,000 of that capital county facility sales tax into bond and interest to cover those payments every year. Okay. All right.
I got a question.
So, yes, Tim.
So this new property, why wouldn't you put that in the capital project too?
That's not a capital project, it's more of an operational thing. Capital projects is more building something, but basically where they paid it before is from the O&M fund.
So a certain dollar amount qualifies for capital?
I don't know that it's a certain dollar amount, I think it's more so what the project is. A lot of times when you're using capital projects, it's for things that you've gone out to referendum for. It doesn't have to be because now we have that county facility sales tax. So if we were planning on using that money for a project, it would come out of capital. Okay. But in this situation, where the district paid for it before was out of the O&M. Okay. The tort fund, I want to talk about that. The reason for the negative there, Informacast, got to make sure I get that word right. Informacast security system that we're purchasing this year, $355,000. That's coming out of tort, so that's a one-time expense that's coming out of there. The bleachers we're going to be replacing at Dunlap High School, we're actually going to be taking out of tort. So again, those are some big one-time expenses. That's why you see some of those red numbers. The other thing about tort is we are moving. A few years ago, if you saw that graph, you'll see that the tort fund has really skyrocketed as far as the fund balance. What happened was a few years ago when the district approved the risk management plan back in 2016, in conjunction with that, what happened was the levy for that was increased too, and the idea was that some of the salaries are going to be moved to being paid out of tort. That just hadn't happened yet, and so we're taking care of that in this budget. So actually, we're moving, I think it was like $760,000 of ed fund salaries, portions of administrator salaries, nurses' salaries, and teaching aid salaries can be paid for out of the tort fund. And so since we have that ability to do that, we're moving those salaries out of there as well. So that's a difference in the tort fund. Yes?
So my recollection is different on that. My recollection for increasing the tort fund was that we were told that it was highly likely, or there was a good chance that we would have tax cap legislation. And so a number of us went to, the different conferences, and the advice at that time was increase your rate in your tort fund and other funds where you can, in case we have tax caps, and then you have to start covering salaries. So, when I supported that, it was with the understanding that if we didn't have tax caps, we would then reduce that rate. So there was no plan at that time to bring over those risk management. It was only if we got the tax caps and we really needed to.
Yeah, and I obviously don't have that. But I will tell you, if we did not move those salaries from the ed fund would be an additional $760,000 on the rent.
Right, and we would have to take that out of reserves.
Right.
Yeah. So
that is the tort fund.
So have we looked back that several years ago, did we approve the risk management plan?
Yes, so you had one.
So
you
it
had
has
one in
been.
20
So it has been officially approved?
Yes, and then
They
we just reapproved it.
It just was not,
we just updated
and
it.
it was not implemented.
And so the risk management plan just allows you to take it. You can still take those salaries out of the education fund. If we didn't take the salaries out of the education fund, we would, potentially be able to reduce the rate on the tort fund as we had planned to do if we didn't have tax caps.
Well, but the money's in there now.
Right, if you'll notice, we have $2.8 million
So if it's not utilized.
And it's limited on what we can use that.
Right.
The auditor would probably, if you don't get the money out of that fund and utilize it, because you're not allowed to keep it and rental money.
Right.
So you have to utilize it or we'll
Well,
get
or lower the rate. We could
Lower the revenue.
lower the taxes.
Yes, for the next year.
Right.
But for this year.
Yeah, this year it already is what it is, so we
to
need to use some of that money that we're accumulating.
And so right now there's a $788,000 deficit. So even if we took that entire $737,000 in salaries out of there, we'd still be about zero, right? We'd be even. So.
But again, those are just one-time expenses, so they're eating up a lot of that fund.
Right, but I mean, if we lowered the rate and used all the money this year, we would be okay. Right. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, anybody else before we move on? All right, health, life, safety, that is what it is. We're looking at a loss there. Partly that is we do build in that cushion a little bit in that fund. So you'll see bottom line, negative 3.8. Again, so much of that is that capital projects of negative 2.2. Okay? I'm not going to get into the weeds here because I'm taking way longer than I wanted. But this is the FY20 tentative budget. Again, I break it down so it's a little bit more detailed. Revenue, expenditures, and that just kind of breaks that down for you between what it is. Again, salaries and benefits are always going to be our biggest expense.
Damon, can I ask you a
Yes.
question?
Yes.
I'm going to have to go back here. For benefits under, and I know it's the education fund, but we're going through it right here.
Yeah.
It seems as though last year we were significantly, we budgeted 14%, 14% too much, okay? So to speak, right?
Yes.
Go ahead. I know you have an answer, but.
I think this is what you're asking. How come it's such a difference in the years? We were way over budgeted in benefits in Fund 10 the year before. So one of the things that I did in this year's budget is look for those big differences that I know necessarily are beyond a cushion. And it's not, I don't know what the reasoning was. It could just be that it got overlooked. I don't know. But I felt the need to get that far more in line with what I think our actuals are going to be. So it looks very deceiving because salaries are going up and benefits are going down, but it really was about cleaning up the differences between budget versus
Year over
actual.
year, are you anticipating a 9% increase? Does that seem right?
In
Actual
benefits?
budget? Mm-hmm.
No, in benefits this year, the CIE rates, trust rates are staying the same this year. So we didn't have to budget for an increase in benefits this year.
Except for maybe an increase in staff?
I'm looking at.
Well, sure, yeah, if we had more staff. But again, part of that was all it was about cleaning it out.
Yeah, and I
That's just the
appreciate,
best way to explain it.
I really appreciate those numbers being more accurate. It's nice for us, because otherwise you're
And
just.
again, that's one of those, we don't know. We don't know if people are gonna take family, they're gonna take singles, you want to allow for some of that, but you don't want to blow it up either, assuming everybody's gonna take family insurance. Did that answer you, Teresa?
I think so. Do you have an EAB slide about, and the reason I'm asking this, and I'm going back a little bit, and I apologize for that, but our revenues are a little bit higher than last year, right?
Yes.
And our EABs are going down. Is that because the taxes are a year in arrears? Is that
No,
what's
so this
happening?
is going to be one of those really unusual variables. It's always very difficult in comparing year to year
Right.
because you've always got to keep in mind those variables that come into play. So the variable that comes into play this year is the IDEA money that we typically only got a small portion of directly, and then the remainder of that went to CEPCO. All of it comes to the district now. So that alone is almost $650,000 to $700,000 additional revenue that's coming to the district. So it kind of, it almost offsets. But all that's going to be taken up in the expenditures as well. But it makes it look different than it did last year, even though the EAB went down. All right. Good? Okay. Let's jump ahead. Transportation. And again, this is just more of the detail as far as what each category is going to be at. You've already seen the overall picture for that. And then same thing with tort. And then the last thing I want to show you, I think, is this. So this slide just kind of sums everything up. I like to provide sometimes when you're looking at, well, wait, what did we budget the year before? So this provides the revenue that we budgeted, not the actuals, but the revenue we budgeted for 19, revenue for 20, expenditures, and then it gives you that budget difference. So you're kind of comparing apples to apples, so you can see what did we do a year ago, or what did we think was going to happen a year ago compared to what we think is going to happen this year. And then the last thing I will kind of say is what we will be doing in the fall once we get into levy season, that's when we're going to start looking at our projections then for the next few years because we will have a far better understanding or knowledge of what's going to happen with the EAV in the fall than we do right now. And we always want to provide as accurate as information as we possibly can, especially because when we're projecting, because we will get held to what we project, and we want to make sure that we're providing that as accurately as possible. So sorry that I bored you to death.
No, you did a very good job.
Is there anything else I can answer for you?
Well, what I was wondering is we've typically started the budget process a little bit earlier and just had more time. We've had months to go over the budget. And I was just wondering if the rest of the board has any interest, I certainly do, in having kind of a committee of the whole budget hearing where we kind of delve into this a little bit more, like which positions are being added and which expenses and why.
Sure, I can tell you what positions we're adding actually right now if you want to know.
I mean, I don't know that we want to do it now, but and then
between now and the next meeting.
Yeah. Sure. And then the other thing I'd really like to look at is whether or not we should take that money out of tort. I feel like when I voted for that raise in the rate, that it was under the condition that if we didn't have tax caps, that we would bring back down that rate. So I would actually favor bringing down the tort rate, taking more money out of reserves. I know it's going to be a bigger deficit for the education fund, but I feel like we have the reserves. That's what we have them for a rainy day, and we should use them for that. And it also sort of, I don't know, keeps us a little more honest, makes us feel the pain a little bit more, and so I'd rather do that since that was what our intention was.
Yeah, my caution about that is that we do have to use up some of that tort fund balance. And even if we did the salaries this year and we decided, there can always be moved back as well. But one of the things the auditors Dr. Hummels was exactly right. They're going to say, you have too much money in this fund. You have to use up some of that money. So the option always is, and we can certainly discuss it more, the option always is to use some of that now. And then if we decide to, we can, when the EAB goes back up, if that's next year, start talking about budget next year, we can always look at shifting salaries back as well. Just some information, just some things to think about.
Yeah, and I think that's something we could talk about at a budget hearing if we had that.
Yeah.
But I guess I don't understand. So right now, we're at a $788,000 deficit in the tort. So if we didn't take that money, we would still use up all the money that we're bringing in this year, correct?
We would probably come close. I don't want to say that without
But I mean,
actually
like
looking
maybe
into it.
50,000. I mean, it'd be close. So
Yeah.
wouldn't that be enough to satisfy the auditors? Because it would be the same amount as last year?
No, because then you're still having a $2.8 million fund balance. Because if all we do is zero out this year, you still have $2.8 million then in the tort fund.
Okay, but we had it last year too.
Sure.
And if we lower the rate, we'll be getting less money in future years, which would help us whittle down
It
that.
depends on what we use that money for, if we have projects to use it for.
Right. So I guess that would be my preference.
Anyone else have any comments about that?
Yeah, I do. Not about that particular thing, but it's my understanding that we have to approve by law a budget in September.
Yes.
So we have to approve this tentative budget tonight.
Correct.
However, having said that, there are 3 new board members on the board, and we just received all this information on Friday. This is a massive amount of information. And I've been called by every single board member over the weekend, the past number of days, except one, but including the board member who's not here tonight, because there is so much here. And there are a lot of questions. And I would back what Karen says. We need to have a meeting to make sure that we understand this between now and the next board meeting when we have to finally approve it.
We can do that, and you can ask, Carrie can put out a schedule planner or doodle or whatever you call it, and see what dates work for everyone, and those that are interested, hopefully come and ask more questions, get some clarity on that. I will say it's not unusual for school districts to do it on this timeline, but agreed, last year we did it much earlier, and previous years we did as well, so.
Yeah, it's standard August, September. We'll be more than happy to explain anything that needs to be explained in between. And
we can do that.
That's why it's on display for 30 days.
right.
And we
With
can
that
have
very
a committee.
understanding, there's
Right.
going to be-
I will tell you one thing to keep in mind is, as I've told you before, salaries take up a huge chunk of that budget. We didn't even have the contract settled with the DEA until
Right.
July. We didn't have other salaries determined, so we wouldn't have been able to give a very accurate portrayal of what this year's budget was going to be really much sooner than this.
But with that being said, I gave you guys a document that kind of has a budget calendar on it, which will move this process up a month next year.
That'd be great.
So we were kind of up against it this year, and I realize it's a lot of information, especially when it's not something you deal with on a regular basis. So we'll make that adjustment. You know, we have a 3-year contract, so we can very easily project salaries much better than we could in getting them on July 24th, I believe was the date.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask about is, there are many of us who've been uncomfortable with, and I know you are too, with continuing to lease the district office. And I know a lot of us want to move on that right away and have some sort of a resolution. Is there a need to put any money in the budget this year for that?
If there is, we can always go back and amend it.
Yeah, that's what we have this time period before the final budget in September.
Okay, so we should put that in at this point?
Well, I think we need to look in realistic. We're still a year and a half away before the next lease is up. So nothing's probably going to happen as far as a different space in this new fiscal year. Between now and June.
So we're going to have to approve a lease for this year and for next year?
Where our lease will be effective, it ends on January 31st.
It was January.
So
to
we're
January.
covered now through January 31st, which is half of this fiscal year.
Okay.
I don't know that, I can't see us probably moving anywhere before February 1st.
Oh, really?
Well,
I'd love to.
I mean, if you guys I'd love to, that'd be great.
I don't know, it just seems like, it seems like we can never, we're always approving the next leaks because we never have time.
I'm going to make a comment here, and I know I've talked to a couple about it, but I think, to make it that quick, it's almost September. I don't know that you could get out of there that quick with, it's not just moving people, it's moving network, it's all of that type of stuff. But what I would recommend is now, because we know we most likely will have to sign that lease, is getting a committee put together, probably a couple board members, getting options out there so we're not in this same situation next year. And it has to be a very aggressive timeline with milestones to make sure we'll meet it. So I think that needs to start now. And
Yeah, I'm not talking about moving in before January. What I was saying is, yeah, we need to start building it so it's ready.
This is where we were last year, and I know several board members, and I know Abby, you were once, and I do not want to approve a lease again, and I
said I will not do it again.
Yes, exactly.
And here we are.
But I think we're at a time crunch. I don't, the timeline now, probably we could not get out of there in that amount of time, but we need to have a committee now to make sure it doesn't happen again next year.
Exactly.
We need to start now.
Karen's not suggesting that we have the administration outline for this.
No, I'm
this year.
not.
She's
I'm
talking
suggesting
about
we have
putting
it
money in next year's budget,
so that we can build it
For that
for a year from
facility.
January.
and she's right.
If we make, we're not there yet, we don't have any information. The budget is a very educated guess. And if something like this comes up and we have to, as he said, we blew it on this line item,
That's
we can
what we
always go
meant.
back and amend.
Okay.
By the exact same process we're doing now. You
Okay.
can amend, 30-day tentative budget on display and then adopt. So
I just
if that
thought
comes to fruition, absolutely, we can do that.
Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong, but you could use your lease expenses towards the payment of the new facility, right?
Right.
It wouldn't be any different in the budget.
Maybe, that's true, you're right.
Yeah, there's
And
enough
hopefully-
money going to be in there no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
So maybe it's only architectural stuff and maybe it's minor.
I would be 100% supportive of exploring options immediately.
We
Okay,
just had this conversation in the office.
Okay.
We're more than ready.
good.
And we're going to be talking about it later today.
Do we need formal action on Teresa's recommendation?
I think we probably can do that. We're going to be talking about
Okay.
building options anyway, so. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. Okay, are there any further questions regarding the tentative budget? All right. District office lease extension. Information regarding the district office lease extension is in the board packet. Are there any questions?
I got ahead of ourselves a little bit.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
Okay, we're going to also be talking about this again, I'm sure, but Dr. Dearman and I spoke at length when I met with him last week for the pre-board meeting. And, we've talked about several different options. People have kicked around various options. I've spoken to many people, some in the audience. We've all talked about ideas. People have talked about building a new grade school and using an old grade school. We've talked about building an office. We've talked about the DAC. We've talked, Dr. Dearman said, well, what about the trailers at DMS if those are cleared out when we, move the children once that's over with and the grandfather students move on. Possibly a property that we already have. I think what we decided, I said to him, the trailer buildings at DMS would be a great idea. That if you could fit everyone in there, you may have to farm some people out to other buildings, or you could use that as a temporary spot while you were building something. So I thought that was a very good suggestion on his part, but then I thought, oh my gosh, the traffic here is already very congested with the middle school and the high school. And I know we're doing a traffic study. So he and I thought that, until we really come up with a solution, if it's not building, it'd be a good idea to find out what the traffic study says about getting another entrance so that we can alleviate some of the traffic issues that we're having currently with middle school, high school. And you put another administrative office in here, you're going to have those traffic issues as well. So he can talk a little bit more about, when that traffic study is expected to be completed. But I think that will give us some very good information to help look at options and decisions. So as far as the district office lease extension, there's information about the extension in the board packet. Are there any questions about the lease at this point after what I just talked about? I do agree that, you know, some type of committee is an excellent idea.
Is the board okay with, I think everyone's in agreement, we're not a big fan of this lease agreement. I don't think anyone's in love with it. And then next month, as an action item, basically take what Teresa said, let's form a committee and let's start really in earnest looking at options, seeing what's out there and developing a timeline based on it.
Absolutely.
As an action item next month.
Right, and I think we had some place in the past, we even have some you had some drawings
Tom showed me some preliminary drawings.
Okay, and some
Very similar to
options
what we have now.
of that land at the corner across from the library was one of the options. Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure you knew that was
Yes,
there.
thank you.
Okay.
Can that lease be made of 6 months with a month continuance?
We tried that, and
No.
that wasn't, they wouldn't allow us to do that.
Good
So-
idea.
But it gives us time, you know, to utilize that space while they're trying. It just, I think the traffic study is the first place we need to start.
They will be here next week.
And will the traffic study, can we tell them kind of our thought, have you talked to them about our thoughts of maybe putting a district office someplace, and can they incorporate that into their traffic study, different options?
I didn't have a location to tell them where I thought it would be. I showed them what properties we owned, and I also said we could really use more parking.
Yes,
So maybe
yes.
I wanted to present like several different options of what they find,
Okay.
including is it even possible, and we'll check with IDOT, to even have another exit entrance, and then additional parking, and then what that does as far as freeing up possibilities of placing an office somewhere.
So is it too late to ask them to kind of think about that?
No, they haven't started.
Okay.
But I can do that.
Yeah, I think it would be good to include a potential district office in that.
And I like the extra parking space, it's so needed. Any other questions? Okay, organizational chart. Information regarding the revised organizational chart is included in the board packet. Are there any questions on this item? No questions? All right. There are several board policy revisions from IASB included in the packet for review. Many of the revisions are minor and are a result of 5-year review process. I'd like to start with a discussion on policy 2.220. And we've had several different options. When I first came on the board, there was a policy that was given to me in a hard copy. And honestly, I just think it would be so nice if we could get a hard copy for everyone. Even when we're doing these, I don't know, maybe not doing it the way everyone else does, but when I do the quick view, you have to click on it. It takes a while to download, and then you have to look at it, and you click on another. I mean, you know, there's like 20 policies. It takes quite a bit of time to go through that as opposed to just turning a page. So
I already talked with Carrie, and once we get the updates finalized, then she'll print them out.
sometimes
that'd be
it's
great.
nice to have a computer, but you know, when you're on the beach to take an iPad, or when you, it's like sometimes the iPad or whatever it is isn't as convenient because
If
I'm
you're on
not
the
saying
beach, I don't
I'm
feel
not
sorry
saying that
for
I'm on the beach,
Sorry.
but I'm saying there are times when being able to flip the page is far more efficient than clicking and going back and clicking, and I don't read this on the beach. I haven't been to the beach in years, but I'm just saying that's an example of when, you know, electronics isn't beneficial. So I received a policy, and there are 3 in your packet. The policy that I received, I don't see, is this the one? Ann, do you have a copy of it? The initial one that I gave, is this the initial one that I gave you?
Yeah, it says the
I don't remember.
IASB policy.
Well, this is one of them, but the one that I received, I think I texted you and asked that it be put in the packet, but it was a very simple policy that was given to me. You have it?
All 3 of them.
Okay.
That's the same thing she's got there.
Okay, all right. So, okay, thank you very much. The board president is responsible for focusing the board meeting on agendas, appropriate content. The superintendent shall prepare agendas in consultation with the board president. The president shall designate a portion of the agenda as a consent agenda for those items that usually do not require discussion or explanation. Upon the request of any board member, an item will be withdrawn from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda for independent consideration. Now, that's a very important sentence because I believe last year that was something that was questioned, and that is definitely any board member's right to do so. Each board meeting agenda shall contain a general subject matter of any item that will be the subject of final action at the meeting. Items submitted by board members to the superintendent or the board president shall be placed on the board agenda for an upcoming meeting. District residents may suggest inclusions for the agenda. The board will take final action only on items contained and posted in the posted agenda. Items not on the agenda may still be discussed. Okay? So somewhere in between now and then, it moved to a policy that I don't know what happened to it because it disappeared. But in the past years, we came up with a form idea so that you'd fill out the form and then you would submit it before the board meeting, and the board would vote by a majority on whether or not they felt it was an item that we wanted to consider. And that happened several times, and usually it was on the agenda. Between now and then, with the new policy that ended up in our current policy manual, it was changed to unanimous approval, and I don't remember any of us requesting that it be a unanimous vote. We discussed this at our policy committee meeting about using the form, but I do not believe we discussed it about being a unanimous vote. If you look down in the footnotes, it does say something about if you want to discourage or not encourage agenda items, put this phrase. Somehow that phrase was put in there. So I'm not sure anyone wants to stifle or discourage board members from being able to do board business and bringing up a subject. But even with this current policy that says discussion items may be added upon unanimous approval of those board members present, the board will take final action alone. And then the last sentence, items not on the agenda may still be discussed. Well, that's pretty contradictory. If you can still discuss an item that's not on the agenda, but yet you have to have a form and unanimous. So this unanimous approval, I think, is definitely something we want to either suspend the policy or propose to change the policy. In your packet was the proposed policy, and it reads, I'm just going to read the second paragraph because that's the only one that changed. Each board meeting agenda shall contain general subject matter of any item that will be subject of final action at the meeting. Any board member may submit suggested agenda items per the district's process to the superintendent and board president for consideration at an upcoming meeting. District residents may suggest inclusions for the agenda. Discussion items shall be added to the agenda upon majority approval of those board members present. The board will take final action only on items contained in the posted agenda. And I don't know why this is still in there because it says items not on the agenda may still be discussed. So it's still contradictory. Why would you still discuss items not on the agenda if we had to vote for it to be on the agenda by majority or unanimously?
I think
the voting or the
second item's not on the agenda that may still be discussed. I know that we used to, and Karen, you might know this, maybe you do too, Abby. Didn't we have something on the agenda that used to be other items or something?
Other business.
Other business, and then we removed it.
Yes.
So this would be contradictory to that when we made that decision.
You're right.
Right? Do you agree with that, Karen?
Yes.
Okay.
Do we have any, I mean, so you think we should continue to go with this form and the majority approval? Or do you think we even need to have a majority approval? If a board member who's elected by the public to represent the public has an item that they think is important enough to put on that agenda, I think they should be able to get that placed on the agenda. Now, of course, hopefully no one would abuse this privilege and bring up 50 items in one meeting. But do we really want to restrict our board members? I don't know. Let's have some discussion on this.
No, I say no. I mean, we're elected by the public and our taxpayers to be able to discuss items and represent our taxpayers. And we should be able to discuss anything. I mean, any person can get up here at the beginning and talk about whatever they want to talk about. But as board members, we're not allowed to discuss things.
I don't think it's a matter of not being allowed to discuss things. I think it's a matter of, you know, and maybe Karen, you recall why this was put into place. I don't know exactly.
Well, I don't ever remember it being put into place where it had to be a unanimous.
No, not that.
Oh.
But for proposing that agenda item.
The form.
Something to be placed on the agenda.
So the form was, I think, Dawn.
I agree, but I guess why was that? Why was the other taken off? I'm trying to recall.
I think it was because there was a feeling that there were too many items.
I think that's what was happening too. And that's why I asked you that question. I think that's what it was. There were so many things happening at board meetings that proposal was put into place for that reason.
We had that one retreat that was off-site, and we came up with a zillion different things, and a bunch of us were new, and it was, I think, overwhelming. And that meeting, coupled with, you know, being able to add anything, made for a really, really, really big list, and that's why it was taken off. But I don't know. I think it wouldn't hurt to try just allowing any item to be added. I think people will be reasonable about that. I also think when you talk to Dr. Dearman about it, he'll maybe say, you know, this is something we can handle administratively, or this is something, you know, I think it can be worked out. So I don't have a problem just having going back to the policy where you can add an agenda
But then
item.
I think also it gives board members time to prepare. I mean, if it's something that they're not prepared to discuss, right? It would give you that opportunity to do whatever research that you would need on a specific topic. Because if you just bring it up and we're not aware, we may not be in the position to discuss it at that time because we don't have the information.
It would be nice if we knew ahead of time.
Exactly.
So if you're going to bring an agenda item, perhaps you would submit it to myself or Dr. Dearman by Monday of the week of the next board meeting, or some deadline.
I'd be okay.
Well,
Yeah,
doesn't
that's
it
good.
go on as an information item, so you've got a whole
Yes,
month?
so it goes on
Right.
rather than waiting a whole month to approve it, and then the next month we have to discuss something that was very pertinent this month. I agree with that.
I'm okay with that, but to do it right now, like if
Yeah,
you bring
but not
something
to
up
do it at the board
that-
meeting.
That I would, you know,
Right.
wouldn't be able to discuss at the time because I don't have the knowledge of.
And you
or
haven't done any background
Any research.
knowledge, right.
Correct, that's what I would think.
This is an information item, right, for action next month, right?
No, we're talking about it right now.
Well, are we
Yeah, it would be
approving
put on
this
as an
policy?
information.
Well, but I think for tonight, maybe we should suspend this policy if there are other things that
Well,
need to be
all I'm saying
discussed.
is, if we're voting on it next month, right? Well, I'm going to vote to go back to the IASB policy. I'm just letting you know that right now.
Okay.
I will vote to go back to the old policy,
Thank you.
to the one that they promulgated. Then we
And that's the
have-
one that allows any member to
Yeah.
submit an agenda item. And are you okay with the Monday before the
Monday before the Friday. it goes out?
Friday before it
That
goes
makes
out?
sense to me.
The only reason why, Mike, is because it'd be better when it becomes an information item for us to be able to have that information.
If it's
Yeah.
on the agenda, then when you see the agenda, you say, oh, they're going to be talking about
Yeah.
whatever. AstroTurf. So you could maybe get online and look about AstroTurf.
Sure.
So be able to speak about it intelligently that particular month.
So are we suspending the form?
If we suspend it, I think it's 240, we can suspend it immediately. If we wait, we can't supposedly even talk about it now, then it has to be put on for discussion for September, which means then you can't even vote on it until October. So it's this thing that's putting you out 2 months. So if we suspend it, it's just done. And we can move on with how we've basically done things before, and next month we could put on the old policy or whatever policy we want.
For action.
For action next
Yeah.
month. Yeah.
Because otherwise we're kind of caught in this quandary of,
Well, this is the first reading of the policy. This is strictly informational, so we have the opportunity to adjust these before any formal action is taken, which will be next month.
So we can vote on it next month.
We can vote on it next month, but we could suspend the one we have until that's voted on.
But we don't need to, do we?
well, according to the policy now, we can't talk about it. We have to put it on for next month. That's what the policy says right now.
Oh, you're
The
saying
policy-
for your new agenda item.
Yeah, if you want
Okay.
to talk about something.
I was just talking about this policy, sorry.
Well, that's the same.
I agree with you, Ann, I see
Okay.
what
You
you're
see what
saying.
I'm saying?
So
The
just
way
on,
it is now, you can't discuss it.
Wait, are you
can't.
confusing the proposed policy with the
I gotcha, I
current?
understand now.
There's something
Because I
later on
think
the
currently
agenda
it-
that we
Yeah,
would like
okay.
to discuss.
Yeah.
So, anyway, we're gonna vote on a new policy next month.
Correct.
But do
So
we have
is
to
everyone okay with going to the original policy that they've recommended? With the understanding that you will, yes, the original ISB,
ISB, not
Date
our
October
one part.
2016 at the top.
yes, the one, yeah, 2016, the one that I was given, I'm sure everybody else was given when they received their.
one thing on there though, it says items on the agenda may still be discussed, so Teresa's not gonna be comfortable with that, right? If I
So you
talk
wanna
about
take that part
channels
out?
tonight.
Well, the problem is sometimes, and I think it's state law. I think you have to be able to talk about an item. The law says you can't vote on an action item,
Yeah.
but like if you have an emergency thing that you need to talk about, I think that you should have to leave that in there.
Okay.
I'm good with
Yeah,
it.
I agree from
I
that
have to do the
perspective.
First Amendment too.
Yeah,
Freedom of speech.
right.
Okay.
I'm good
Do
with
we
it.
have to add in there that you need it by a certain time?
I would think it would be a ladies and gentlemen's agreement that
Okay.
we would get it to Dr. Dearman or myself by Monday of that week so that he can work it into his agenda. So when I meet with him on Wednesday or whenever, Thursday, his agenda's complete. It will go out to you, so you'll have the weekend to look at it. And then Carrie can make sure she has it in time to get it on the agenda
So
as
you're
well.
not saying the Monday right before the meeting, you're
No,
saying
no, no.
the week ahead?
The week before.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay.
But this would be
please.
a gentleman's agreement and not necessarily written into the
If there's
policy.
something that is an emergency and we have to discuss something that comes up in a timely it takes a decision to be made, we can still discuss it. But if it's something that you really want to get done, like a new district office, that's not going to happen that week, I would think it would be, is Monday too soon? Tuesday? I mean, sometime at the beginning of
As
that week.
long as it's okay with Dr.
Is
Dearman.
that okay with you?
That's when we're putting the packet together.
Yeah,
I have to have it done to get out to you guys.
yeah, Monday or Tuesday, Tuesday would be
Tuesday
drop
is
dead.
doable.
Okay, Tuesday at the latest,
I want
by
to make sure
noon.
I'm reading this correctly though, and I'll give a quick example, we can't talk about it, but like Ann brought forth something about a security question. And she filled out the form, she did everything she's supposed to, but I see that as really important. And I want that as an agenda item. I think everybody needs to hear that. Does this policy, as you guys interpret it, give me the latitude to do that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean,
As long as Dr. Humbles, when she meets with you, agrees with it,
Yeah.
right, in her pre-meeting.
right, and it is the board's meeting, so the board should be able to bring up reasonable items. Just as if you have something that's pertinent to the district, you don't have to fill out a form. So I think, that as long as we're all respectful and we don't take advantage and no one comes in grandstands right at the beginning of the meeting, it has a policy and it's a surprise to everybody. I think that makes it very difficult to discuss.
I like the gentleman's agreement, that shows trust.
Okay, very good. All right.
So are we suspending this one or not?
I don't think you can. State law requires we do have a policy on part of this. If you can't suspend the entire policy.
It says actually 2240 says you can suspend something immediately with majority vote. You're going to pull it up?
But this policy has a clause, the state law requires that we have a policy on other portions that are contained in this policy.
Can we suspend the policy and refer to previous board policy of October 2016, so we do have something in place?
Well, you can't take action because it's not on the agenda for action tonight. You can do it. See what I mean? You can't take action on anything that's not on the posted agenda.
I'm just saying it says here that you can suspend something immediately.
You can, but you have to have it on the posted agenda for tonight.
Okay, thank you,
Am I
Carrie.
correct?
I don't know. I'm just reading what the policy says.
Hopefully, we won't have any issues between now and
Okay.
next
Yeah, I
month,
don't think we
but thank you, Ann, I appreciate that you were able to find that information, and we'll go ahead and move on. Board policy revision, it's going to be changed, we'll make sure we change it next month. Future agenda item.
Wait.
What-
Were there any other board policy revisions, issues?
Any additional questions regarding other revisions or other policies?
I think there were a couple questions we had. There was a brand new policy And it's about forming like a threat assessment committee or something like that. And I guess what my question was is, do we have that committee? I'd hate to have a policy that says we have a committee if we don't. And I don't want to, I don't want to have something, and then not be following it, so.
That's new legislation as well, that we have threat assessment teams.
Teams,
at
okay.
each building, and Mrs. Hart has those and
Okay.
has already had meetings with them.
Okay, so you're okay with that language, and we're going to be able to comply.
We've been doing those assessments for the last 2 years. We've had a committee for
Okay.
the whole district for the last 2 years, I believe. Now we're breaking them up to elementary, middle school, and high school, and we'll be meeting quarterly.
Okay, because it said the policy was optional. That's what was confusing to me.
We've been doing it.
Okay,
So now we're just breaking up into elementary, middle school, and high school, and
Great.
making sure we've been way ahead of that.
okay, good.
So this is the policy 4190, is that the one we're talking about?
Threat assessment teams?
Yes.
Okay. On policy 2230, I'm having a hard time pulling stuff up. This one, I would say it's somewhat minor, but it takes the board president out of it. I don't know if you can pull it up. And if we're going to have time issues about how long people can talk, wouldn't it be the president that says that?
Yeah.
It's 2230, let me see.
Yeah, I think practically speaking, it makes sense to leave the board president in there.
Because I don't think you want just board people piping up.
Where are you looking?
It's number
Oh,
3.
Observe.
The board president's decision when necessary and appropriate. They've taken out board presidents, and then down below under C, observe the board president's decision. I think practically speaking, you don't have the whole board act on that. When somebody's out there testifying, it ends up being the president who kind of makes that call.
Okay, I see.
My preference would be to leave the board president in.
Okay.
So that would be under 3, like where it's pink.
I see.
It's under 3A and 3C.
Is there a reason the board president was taken out, or is that what they're recommending?
That's their recommendation.
I think that's IASB.
Yeah, IASB. I would be fine with leaving the board president in.
I'm okay leaving it in as well.
Okay.
Any other policy questions or concerns?
So, are we going to make that change?
Yes.
Okay.
Should I keep going?
Yes.
Okay, policy 2240. If you go to the second paragraph about policy development, oh no, it's policy development, and then it says a board policy committee will consider all policy suggestions. My question is, do we have a board policy committee, and do we need one?
Yeah.
We did. When we did the policy review, there were 3 of us there.
Right. But I don't know that we have one right now, and then we had one last year where it was
we did. because wasn't
Cheryl
Beth
and
on
Beth.
it?
We
Right.
didn't
Beth was
dissolve
on
it, so do we have to reinstate it?
We should.
I don't think we have to.
Well, let's form one.
Pardon?
Let's form one. We need to form one.
Well, do you want to form one, or do you just want it to be a committee as a whole? Because otherwise then you have to go have separate things and post and.
Would the entire board like to be involved in the dissection of each policy?
I liked it when we had a committee.
I do too.
I think it's a good idea to have somebody that digs down into it, and you don't have to have 7 people doing it.
I would like Ann to be on that
volunteer?
policy
Yeah, I nominate
committee.
Ann too.
All right, I like.
Is there anyone else that'd like to serve on that committee with Ann?
I think Cheryl's still on it, isn't she?
That'd be great.
I know she's not here.
Okay.
We said she's not here, we can.
Right. I'm not sure she wanted to be on it though.
I'm not sure Anna wanted to.
So, I mean, I would be happy to do it if Cheryl doesn't want to. I'll let Cheryl
Very
do it.
good.
Why don't we ask her
Very
if she
good.
doesn't?
Very good, thank you. Yes, keep going.
I have one clarification though.
Hang on a second.
For the policy committee, we utilized it last year only if there were policies that had some real substantive changes that needed to be reviewed. Are you wanting to do all the policies for every committee, or just when we see ones that are ginormous, that really need some research behind them?
I believe we almost have to decide if it's major or minor.
Well, they can read them also ahead of time, and if they feel like they need to meet or they just have comments, they could do
So every time we have changes, we just need to set a policy committee to go through all of them? Is that
Or
what
you
you're-
can forward those.
I think just forward them and then let them
You
decide.
could forward them electronically, and if they need to sit down together, they can.
Like this time, right?
That would be far more efficient.
Yeah. The issue is if two of them meet, it's a violation of the Open Meetings Act.
No, we
Without
post
being
them.
posted.
We
Without-
post them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
That's if you have a committee.
But they could do work at home as
right, but
well.
we're talking about forming a policy committee.
Okay. Right.
So I think that if they worked individually and decided that they needed to meet or not, would that work? They could individually decide whether or not they needed to meet, and then if they decided they wanted to talk together, then we'd have to post it. Correct?
Yes, that's possible.
Send the press updates to
Both of them.
both Ann and either Cheryl or Karen. You guys go through them, talk to each other. If we need to have a,
Well, we can't talk to each
Can't
other.
Well, you
to
can
each other.
talk and say, do we need to meet?
We have to
Yes,
talk
we
to
need
you or
yes.
Carrie.
They
Correct.
can't
And
do
if we
it
say, hey, I think we need to talk, then we have to post the meeting.
correct.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess my question is, do we want a committee where it's not a committee?
Yes,
you
we
can just
want a
talk about
committee,
it.
because
and
we
then
don't want to
bring
spend
it
every
forward.
board meeting.
Well, she's saying, if we don't have the committee, then we don't have to post, and you don't have to go through all that formalized, you can just have two people.
No, you can't do that.
Well, that's not being
You
very
can't do that.
I mean,
No,
that's
it
that's
is.
not being
Whether you're
transparent.
in no matter where you're at, if you're together, you
No,
can't
that's
discuss
if you have the committee, but if you don't have the committee, you can.
Because two people can talk.
Two people can talk.
Yes, absolutely, they
Yeah.
can talk.
I would be careful with that. though.
No, it's in here. It says
Because
it-
even with the policy committee, I was told by IASB, and we have to post it if there's two people on the committee.
That's
Right,
it.
but if we don't
If
have
it's
a
a
committee.
board-created committee, that is
Right.
correct.
She's saying if we don't have a committee. So she's saying maybe we shouldn't form a committee?
But isn't that the same as two of you discussing any board business via email or phone?
Right, and so that's
conversation?
allowed. Two
which is
people
allowed.
can.
That's what it
It's
says in the
as
Open
long as
Meetings
it's not a
Act. It's
formal
allowed.
Yes.
committee. It's not a majority of a
Yes,
committee.
two people can always talk about any issue before a board meeting, either on the phone or in person or on email.
It's
Do you
in,
agree
it's
with
in,
that, Carrie?
it's in the Open Meetings Act.
No, it is,
Yeah.
I get
But what
that.
can't happen is Ann can't talk to Karen, who then talks to Tim, who then talks to Abby. That's called daisy chaining, and that is a violation.
right. And you can't have three.
Correct.
You guys,
So I don't care, I'm okay with either one.
I think we should be transparent and follow the recommended OMA guidelines, have a committee, and, meet if it's necessary. If you both
Okay.
read it, you both have questions and concerns,
Then we set,
you set a meeting, and Carrie can post it, and then it can be done
Okay.
properly.
Let me ask, how often do you think this is gonna happen?
quarterly, we
Quarterly.
get policy revisions
So, I mean-
quarterly.
4 times a
4
year.
times a year.
It's
And
not
you may
bad.
not even have to meet every time.
Maybe.
So it wouldn't add a lot to this night,
No.
not near what it did tonight.
and how much notice are you supposed to get? A couple of days or something?
I mean,
I have
was
to have
that much?
everything ready and posted within 48 hours, like the entire packet and everything I have to have ready 48 hours before.
Okay.
To
So I
post it?
need time to prep it, so within the week before at least, yeah.
Okay. So are we okay with forming a committee, Ann?
It's more bureaucracy, but if that's what we should do, we should do it. I mean, otherwise, two people can talk, and then you can bring it to the board, and you can do it. Otherwise, you gotta post, and two people can talk. And
But if
I'm
the
just-
committee meets and they bring forth a recommendation, then we're not having to sit here
Okay.
and discuss 20 policies for an hour.
And we could
Okay.
do it a half an hour before the board meeting, so it's not an extra meeting, and it's easy if somebody wants to come early and another member
Sure.
wants to sit
You
in.
mean like a committee of the
Some
whole
of the
type
policies
thing?
involve the curriculum director or a nurse, so you have to make sure you include them in the conversation. So, I mean, that's a good reason to have the policy committee meeting. Because some of those policies do involve Matt or, somebody else that's happening in the district, and how is that going to be implemented, so.
Let's form a committee. I'd like to appoint Ann, and Cheryl will be on that committee. Unless she declines, then it will be Karen. So, any other questions on specific policies, or should we defer to the committee?
Well played.
So if the committee, we do have some more, so the
Okay,
committee
we'll
can-
bring them on. Let's go.
Okay,
People need to get to work tomorrow and get to bed tonight.
no, that one looks fine. Let me see. I'm just going through the rest of them. On This is policy 430, revenue and investments.
Okay,
On investments under, it says the superintendent shall either appoint a chief investment officer or serve as one. Do we want the board to be able to do this as well? Because you're talking about all your investments and, you know, right now we've got 50 million. Should the board be able to say something about this?
I thought the board did appoint the chief investment officer.
Well, this says the superintendent does.
But I mean, didn't we take action to do that with, isn't Damon our chief investment officer? I thought we had to vote on that.
That is in Damon's job.
I'm thinking of treasurer.
Oh, am I thinking of treasurer? Okay.
the board appoints a treasurer to oversee investments.
Maybe.
Superintendent typically makes a recommendation on your chief investment officer, usually brings that recommendation to the board, and then...
And right now ours is Damon, right?
That is
Okay.
correct.
I mean, I'm not talking about a certain person, I'm just talking about the policy.
No,
in
no,
general.
no, I understand. So just,
Superintendent, how about shall make a recommendation
There-
for chief investment officer? And the board shall
Everybody-
consider his recommendation or
Yeah.
something, that'd be okay? All right,
yep.
very good. Moving right along, do we have another policy
Let me look
question?
here. I can see why you guys want a committee. A lot of these we think are law changes that aren't that big of a deal. 6185, I'm trying to pull this up. I think, I didn't really understand what this one was.
Remote education?
Oh, yeah. Is this like a D2 or Wildlife Prairie Park, or what are remote educational programs?
I just didn't understand it.
Well,
Matt, do you know? What remote educational programs are? Is that a D2 program, or is that like Wildlife Prairie Park, or
is that online learning?
homeschooling, or I don't know?
Remote education. Do we have any remote educational programs?
Probably not where Mrs. Hart.
It's,
Oh, it's like CEPCO, or?
what,
It says that it's that location outside of the school.
I mean, it says establish a system to determine student participation is the change, and so I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, no, it was IEP team decisions, so.
So this is
Yeah,
more,
it could be any of our offsite, where we send students offsite.
okay, so this could be a Wildlife Prairie,
It could be.
alternative Kiefer.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. That makes
So we
sense.
have a system to determine.
Yes, we have a system to determine the students offsite. But Wildlife Prairie Park, they're not IEP students. Those are students that parents choose to withdraw and put them in that program, and then we exit them.
Okay,
We're not
so
paying for
we're not
Wildlife
part of
Prairie
that.
Park. Right.
Okay. So it would be more like Kiefer, which is,
Or student residential that we're using.
So the only
Student
change is,
residential.
it used to say calculate the number of hours, and now it's saying establish a system. So it seems broader, which I think would be better for
maybe
us
two.
for compliance. So I think it's fine.
okay, next policy?
That's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
May I say something?
Yes, sir.
As someone who spent a career reading boring legal documents, and is pretty worn out with it, thank you, Ann.
That's why she needs to be on that committee.
You're welcome.
Bravo. All right. Are there any additional questions or discussion on the board policy revisions? All right. Future agenda item request for a board retreat. Dr. Dearman has received a board member request to schedule a board retreat for the purpose of setting goals and determining board priorities for the 1920 school year. Board policy 2.220 states that a unanimous approval of those board member presence is needed to approve the request. Without getting into detailed discussion at this time, I will ask for a show of hands for those in favor of holding a certain board retreat type meeting. Those in favor of a goal-setting session, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Very good. We have a unanimous decision.
I
With the
suggest
scheduled board
we
retreat.
not assign that any too soon because we're going to be having a special meeting anyway on the budget, so.
Perhaps after Labor Day
Yeah.
next month. I think that would be, but, okay.
So you're saying a separate meeting? Is that what you were saying?
Well, actually, we're going to
no,
probably
okay.
have our budget committee meeting hearing probably after Labor Day. So do you want to do this in possibly October, 1st of October?
I'm just raising the point, I don't think we want to back them up right next
Right,
week. So
I
it gives
agree.
us some time.
So
On the other
October.
hand,
And
they're
this
tied
this-
together.
The budget is more important, so we need to
And the
protect.
budget can be amended if it's something that
Yeah.
we decide is going to change the budget. So October, 1st of October. Carrie, if you could perhaps send out another one, please.
I won't be doing it in October.
All right.
To be done.
This concludes the information discussion items. The board will now move on to the consent agenda. Are there any questions or discussion regarding items on the consent agenda? Seeing none, could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second?
Second.
Mr. Wisdom, okay, any discussion? Roll call vote?
Disharum.
Aye.
Wisdom.
Aye.
Henry. Aye. Holzhauser. Aye. Humbles.
Aye.
Wagenbach.
Aye.
Motion carries. The board will now move on to action items. Approval, purchase additional vehicles. Information regarding the purchase of additional vehicles for driver's ed is included in the board packet. Are there any questions or discussion? Could I have a motion to approve the purchase of these vehicles?
I so move.
You're right here.
Hold on, as I read that. I move to approve the purchase of 2 additional vehicles in the amount of $42,319.62 as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Wagenbaugh. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. Holhauser. Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Wagenbach.
Aye.
Holzhauser. Aye. Disharum.
Aye.
Henry. Aye. Humbles.
Aye.
Wisdom.
Aye.
Motion carried. The bill list, treasurer's report, and district investment report are included in the board packet. Are there any questions or discussion? Could I have a motion to approve the payment of the bills?
I move to approve payment of the bills in the amount of $4,675,225.83 as presented.
Thank you, Mrs. Holhauser. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Henry. Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Holzhauser. Aye. Henry.
Aye.
Humbles.
Aye.
Wagenbach.
Aye.
Wisdom.
Aye.
Disharum.
Aye.
Motion carried. Information regarding the bids for the Dunlap High School swimming pool HVAC replacement is included in the board packet. Are there any questions or discussion?
I do have a question.
Yes.
Maybe Tom has the answer. The fence was $9,800. The fence is just covering the outside unit for $9,800.
Right, 3 sides. It's, I believe, 16 feet off the wall by 65 feet long.
Wow.
It's got a 12-foot swinging gate. So it's a little bit more than just a attractive fence. It will serve a much needed purpose.
All right, that's 100 feet of fence for $10,000. Just curious. I should have looked at that earlier, or asked earlier, but I didn't see that. All right.
Could I have a motion to accept the bids for the HVAC replacement?
I
I
move
move
to accept the following bids for the Dunlap High School swimming pool HVAC replacement as presented. O'Brien Brothers in the amount of $285,500 for the HVAC unit. Overlander Electric in the amount of $17,805 for electrical. C&G Concrete in the amount of $20,000 for concrete. Automotive in the amount of $10,425 for masonry. Hoagland Fence in the amount of $9,854 for fencing. And Intech in the amount of $7,845 for controls.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Holzhauser. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Mrs. Disharum, any discussion? Roll call vote.
Holzhauser. Aye. Disharum.
Aye.
Humbles.
Aye.
Wagenbach.
Aye.
Wisdom.
Aye.
Henry.
Aye. Motion carried. Information regarding bids for the Dunlap High School gymnasium bleacher replacement is included in the board packet. Are there any questions or discussion?
I do have a question on that. The bleachers have electrical attached to them. What's the electrical part of them?
Yes, they will be controlled electrically.
They push in and out with electrical.
Yes.
And why was one electrical bid like $1,700 and another one was $6,000 something? Were they spec'd or why such the difference?
It was spec'd out very carefully, actually. It's just the way each of the contractors looked at the work.
Okay.
You're exactly right. I looked at the same thing. There was a huge difference in the amount of the bids. So are you confident that this, obviously you are, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Could I have a motion to accept the bids for the bleacher replacement?
I move to accept the following bids for the Dunlap High School gymnasium bleacher replacement as presented. Larson Equipment and Furniture Company in the amount of $161,000 for furnishings, and J. Horn Electric in the amount of $1,932 for electrical.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wisdom. Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Henry.
Aye.
Wisdom.
Aye.
Humbles.
Aye.
Wagonbach.
Aye.
Disharum.
Aye.
Olshauser. Aye.
Very good, motion carried. Information regarding the revision of the middle school handbook language for athletes playing up is included in the board packet. Are there any questions or discussion?
I have a question. I don't know what the final wording is.
Could someone read that?
Here, you read that.
Because
And I should say, thank you, Katie and I have been kicking this back and forth 4 or 5 times, and I think we finally settled on what we think meets what we're wanting to accomplish. So, Carrie, read away.
Student athletes may be allowed to play above grade level, either to ensure an adequate number of participants or based on athletic ability. Prior to moving a student athlete up, the coach must consult with the middle school athletic director and the varsity coach, with the exception of cross country and track.
Is that clear that with the exception of cross country and track, that means they don't have to get approval, or is it sounding like you can't do it at all? That's what I was not clear on.
They don't have to, because they already do that.
Okay, all right.
Well, I'll point out that this issue was brought to the Athletic Leadership Committee about a year ago when this issue first came up. And we talked to the coaches about this. So the combination of the coaches and the athletic director and the Athletic Leadership Committee went over this. And I don't remember all the exact wording, but one of the phrases that we said we felt was important, that it was this could happen in appropriate circumstances. And I'm not hearing that in the proposed language.
The circumstances are outlined.
Well, this says too, to ensure an adequate number of participants or based on athletic ability, but I don't see the language it says, or in other appropriate circumstances.
Would you like to add that?
I would like to. If you need me to make a motion, I will.
Does anyone agree with that addition?
Katie, what do you think?
What we had talked about when we put that was just that kind of encompasses what we felt like. I mean, obviously, these two things are going to be I would say, probably would happen the most often. What I liked about that, when we talked about that, was there could be other circumstances that we are not thinking.
Yeah, I was going to say, what would it be?
And it could, and that was covered those as well, which is why we came up with that language at that time.
So not an example of what that would be? Just...
Are you comfortable then with this, Katie?
Yeah,
The way it's written, or do you think we should add what Mike is suggesting?
I mean, I think either way. I mean, I don't, when I talked to him about other circumstances, and I gave him my example, and he said, well, I think that's athletic ability.
Yeah, she's talking about a setter being moved up.
Like, I talked about, like, positional people.
Oh,
Yeah, well, that's based on
There's
athletic ability.
somebody that doesn't.
You got a setter or you don't.
Oh, yeah.
Mike,
get it. It's not
from a
gonna
legal
hurt.
perspective, Mike,
Yeah,
do you
I
think it's best that we include it?
I do. I don't think we can sit here and think of every possibility.
I do too, and you've worked hard on that committee. I know you've tried to
The whole committee has.
right. And so I think rather than stifle it, if there's something that comes up that can be covered with an
And
extra clause being
again,
added.
this
or phrase.
is what was discussed with the coaches, is my recollection. Because that's the first thing, at least I said, I want to know what the coaches think. And so Katie spoke with the coaches to see what their feelings were on it.
So can you read it the way you think it should be stated?
Maybe he could just read it in the motion.
Okay.
Okay, so that was that phrase.
Yeah, Mike.
Yes. Just go ahead and make the motion and read it in the motion.
Do you want me to?
Do you want it to also outline those other two, or just under certain?
No,
Do you want all
addition.
3 of them?
Should be
Okay,
3.
got it.
No, I got it. So do you want me to read this?
Yes, could you please go ahead and, could I have a motion that you'd like to be, go ahead and read
All right.
the approval and then add that
You have to read it.
under E.
I move to approve the revision of the middle school handbook language regarding playing up as follows. Student athletes may be allowed to play above a grade level, play above either to ensure an adequate number of participants, comma, based on athletic ability, comma, or in other appropriate circumstances. Prior to moving a student athlete up, the coach must consult with the middle school athletic director and the varsity coach, with the exception of cross-country and track.
Second.
Do we want to add effective immediately, just so we know that it's
Oh, that's good.
from here forward?
Okay,
Effective.
Effective immediately.
very good. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion?
Who seconded?
Roll call vote.
Wisdom,
Aye.
Disharum,
Aye.
Henry,
Aye.
Holzhauser, Humbles,
Aye.
Wagenbach.
Aye.
Thank you. And Mrs. Disharum was the one who seconded that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Information regarding the FY20 tentative budgets and public hearing was presented earlier this evening. Are there any questions or discussion, knowing that we're going to have this committee, the whole meeting scheduled within the next couple weeks? Could I have a, go ahead.
I mean, I'm going to vote for the tentative budget. I have major concerns about the transferring the 730 whatever
Okay.
thousand. But I'm going to, support the tentative budget so we can go ahead with the hearing.
Very good. Thank you very much. Could I have a motion to approve the tentative budget?
I move to approve the fiscal year 20 tentative budget as presented and schedule a public hearing for 6 p.m. Are we going to keep the same time? Okay, 6 p.m. on Wednesday, September 25, 2019.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wisdom. Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Henry,
Aye.
Wisdom,
Aye.
Disharum, Holzhauser, Humbles,
Aye.
Wagenbach.
Aye.
Motion carried. Information regarding the resolutions to intervene in property tax appeal, board assessment appeal is included in the packet. Are there any questions or discussion? Could I have a motion to approve the resolutions?
I move to approve resolutions 1, 2, 3, and 4 to intervene in property tax appeal, board assessment appeal as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Disharum. Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Wisdom,
Aye.
Disharum,
Aye.
Henry,
Aye.
Holzhauser, Humbles,
Aye.
Wagenbach.
Aye.
Motion carried. This concludes the action item portion of the meeting. Could I have a motion to adjourn to closed session?
I move to adjourn to closed session for the following purposes as stated in the Open Meetings Act: the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, student disciplinary cases, collective negotiating matters, discussion of minutes of meetings lawfully closed, security procedures, the purchase of lease or lease of real property, and litigation.
Is there a second?
Second.
Very good. Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Disharum, aye. Henry,
Aye.
Holzhauser, Humbles, Wagenbach,
Aye.
Wisdom.
Aye.
Okay, it is 8:50. A motion, let's see, to return, okay, we've already, can I have a motion to approve the human resource consent agenda? Are we on?
I move to approve the human resources consent agenda as presented.
Second. Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Holzhauser, Disharum,
Aye.
Humbles,
Aye.
Wagenbach,
Aye.
Wisdom, Henry.
Aye.
Could I have a motion to approve the closed session minutes?
I move to approve the closed session minutes of the special board meeting of July 10th, the regular board meeting of July 17th, and the special board meeting of July 24th.
Second?
As
Oh,
presented.
I'm sorry.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Wagenbach,
Aye.
Wisdom,
Aye.
Humbles,
Aye.
Disharum,
Aye.
Henry,
Aye.
Holzhauser.
Motion carried. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.